The voice of a complaining young man coming from the inside did not seem to fit the scenery at all. He buried his face and blue hair in one of his books, seemingly ready to give up on his academic aspirations altogether. You can't blame him, though. Being surrounded by a mountain of textbooks would make anyone's head spin, especially if you don't particularly enjoy studying. The young man's mom watched him like a hawk. She knew this rascal had already started slacking off after only 5 minutes of barely picking up a book after stuffing his face with food. He wasn't making his mom's life easy at all. She even compared him to someone named Xiao Ling from Auntie Wang's house who goes to extra classes for 2 hours at noon. He's a bum compared to that kid. Mom wanted to make a compromise. If this young man couldn't stand perusing the pages, then he could help hang the flower baskets on the shop racks for now. But he must remember to tie the ropes securely, as it has gotten extra windy in the city lately. Whatever this task was, it was surely better than burying his head in textbooks. The hanging plants were supposed to be low-maintenance plants that just need water and sunlight. Yet his mom always insisted on changing their position occasionally. Staring at the pot, the boy could not help but wish to just be a plant. All plants do is bask in the sun, drink water, grow a lot, just leading a lazy and comfortable life overall. Even though he's the one using a pretty high ladder, his mom seemed way more concerned about her plants falling than her own son. He was apparently doing it wrong, and she would rather do it herself on second thought. What followed was the ungodly killing ability of every mother ever. The endless barrage of making their child feel like crap for slacking off and lacking motivation. She insisted that even if this kid turned into a plant, he would still probably be a bum. The business of the city was quite a nice change of pace from the chaos of the flower shop brought upon by the terror mom. Being scolded by his mom again and again always gave the young man such severe headaches. He's currently walking through the streets, yawning lazily while half-heartedly reading another book. He really cannot comprehend where his mom gets all these words from when she gets on a roll. She talks like a machine gun that cannot be stopped at all. Or since she runs a plant shop, maybe a pea shooter was a more apt description. While he was busy imagining his mom as a plant versus zombies character, something drastic brought upon by the changing winds of the city was about to happen. A potted plant that looked to be one of those odd Venus flytrap things was knocked down by the wind and was now heading for his head with all its gravitational fury. He was way too bored, lazy, and tired to notice anything happening around him at all, especially some event that was happening way too fast to process. Truck Kun was on a vacation, so Secret Agent Pot Nissan did the job, and he ended up doing a pretty good job of it. 1 second, protagonist was just living the normal life of a normal below-average student. The next, the blood from his skull stained the concrete floor of the streets, mixed in with the dirt, plant, and the broken pot. The onlookers did not expect to see something this brutal on their stroll on the way to work or school or wherever they were going. A student just got hit by a flower pot, and the blood all over the sidewalk was a gruesome sight. Inside the young man's teetering mind, he hazily imagined a beautiful full-course meal of the perfect dinner from meat, veggies, to dessert. He remembered that he shared this amazing dinner with his mom and dad. He even praised her for her always tasty cooking. The young man eagerly took a bite of the rice, as you should always do in meal setups like this. But this white rice tasted a little odd. When he zoomed out of his imagination, his mom and dad were nowhere to be seen. And what replaced the scrumptious full-course meal was plates upon plates of disgusting dirt. Now he has become conscious that his mind might just be playing tricks on his perception. When he woke up, he was in an unfamiliar place that he couldn't quite explain or grasp. It was dark, and the smell was strangely pleasant. The odd thing was that he felt like his arms and legs were tied up. Upon inspecting the empty space even more, he noticed something green on the side and a light right above. Maybe he'll try to climb up and see that light a little better. It worked. Moving his body towards the little bit of illumination, felt like he had been unleashed and rebirthed into the world. It felt like he broke through the earth to feel the elements. It felt that way because that's exactly what had just happened. A small budding plant had broken through the soil to bask in the intimate glow of the sunlight up above. He wanted to wipe the metaphorical sweat off his brows, but he did not feel any eyebrows. Still, finally crawling out of that darkness felt quite nice. Now that he was starting to think about it, something about this setup was extremely odd. Looking to the side, he knows that he wanted to move an arm to touch his face and forehead, but what his vision was giving him was a piece of leaf attached to a lanky stem. Now that he was looking at his whole body, it's fair to say that he looked and felt a lot different from his previous appearance. Not only that, but he was also in the middle of magical foliage, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by mountain ranges. He was not expecting all of these at all. He was frozen solid, not knowing what in the world to do. The nourishing sunlight beamed down upon him along with other budding plants, just like him all around the area. One thing's for sure is that he had somehow transformed into some sort of a little plant. The idea was so ridiculous that his mind is still refusing to believe that any of this was real. Perhaps he was just tripping. Trying to recall what led to this situation, he remembers eating lunch and going to school, then getting hit by a flower pot falling from an ungodly height. It felt ironic as he was just complaining about tending to his mom's hanging flower pots. He can only hope that he did not die such a shameful death in the middle of the midday crowd. It would just be too embarrassing at that point. But now he's starting to slowly come to believe that he really reincarnated into the form of a little fledgling plant. He remembered just a few hours ago, complaining about his studies and wishing just to become a lazy plant that lives a comfortable life. So this might just be it, the answer to his prayers and a possible nightmare scenario at the same time. The god or whoever was in charge of this world was way too sincere and literal. Just because he casually said some nonsense to procrastinate, the deity took it seriously. Now he can only cry and beg to get back to his previous life and form. As he was getting the dramatics out of the way, he remembered something crucial that might just be a game changer in this scenario. In web novels and manhwas, the main character who undergoes rebirth usually gets their own system and follows the path of becoming a god with overpowered abilities. But if that was the case here, then where's his OP system? Why didn't he receive at least a notification sound? He screamed and screamed for the system to appear to no avail. All the other plants from the same batch as him looked at him like a weirdo. A week later, he just quietly accepted the possibility that there might not be a system after pouring his heart and soul into calling for it non-stop. He might just be an ordinary plant, damned to live an ordinary life. The good news was that he's not just a piece of grass. The bad news is he used to be a strapping young man reborn as a weird-looking flower. Thankfully, he spawned in a nice piece of black soil, rich in nutrients, pleasant fragrances, and an oddly good taste. He feels like he can grow well in this environment. What sucks is that it's just a bit crowded in here. Just like the gifted class he was in the previous world where everyone is trying to get ahead. Today was the day that some unpleasant development happened. The sunlight has vanished. It was not cloudy or anything. The skies were as clear as they could be. The problem was that the flowers growing alongside him had left him in the dirt. They've grown to the point of smothering the land and covering the skies. It's just unfair when all of them are plants that should just be chilling. For some reason, this just kept reminding him of the familiar scene back in his school, where everyone was just so eager to impress. This time, he won't let these show-offs take his sunlight. He will push his way through and not let these flowers interrupt his sunbathing time. When he finally muscled through with great effort, he opened his eyes to the bright world that he had grown to love in the past week. His mood was immediately lifted now that he could finally see and feel the sunlight on his skin, or petals and leaves, and everything in his plant parts. Today was a day of unusual occurrence. Now that he had peered over everyone to bask in the sun, he saw some type of animal getting closer and closer to the flower bed. This dum-dum saw a majestic alpaca coming through and started calling it a wild horse. In his past life, Mom and Dad were always so busy with work that they never took him to the zoo even once. Well, this would be his first time seeing a mythical creature. It did not disappoint. The so-called wild horse is pretty cute in its own right. But he stopped in his tracks now that he remembered one simple fact. These things eat grass. There might be a world where the four-legged beast was coming closer and closer to take a bite out of him. Once the alpaca opened its mouth and its spittle flew all over the place, his nightmare scenario might just be happening right about now. He tried to cover himself desperately, not wanting to die yet. When the beast's tongue started coiling around the stems firmly rooted in the area, it had miraculously missed him. The majestic alpaca just stared at him with seemingly knowing eyes as it casually gnawed on the flowers. When it started turning around, he was left as the lonesome flower in the once thriving flower bed. Thankfully, this four-legged beast only took one bite, and it seems like he was not the alpaca's type of lunch. But before completely turning and walking away, the animal wanted to give one last gift to our poor protagonist, a steaming pile of rock-hard and gray doo-doo. He was speechless. He internally asked himself what in the world is happening. He stared at the pile of rich stool, then turned his attention to the enriching soil in which his roots were tethered. Bullets of sweat started dotting his face as he slowly came to realize the implication of this animal's normal but still disgusting behavior. When he finally came to terms with it, he felt the world literally go dull and gray, just like the color of the pile of crap where the nutrients of the rich black soil were coming from. Even though he had become a plant, processing the fact that he had grown as a flower in horse crap was still a bit too much to handle. He couldn't believe he even thought that this very black soil tasted delicious, tender, and palatable. One couldn't stop oneself from throwing up in this situation. Meanwhile, the remaining flowers that survived a few inches from him had been blooming in bliss and happiness under the sun. Of course, Bro had blossomed too. But there's a new development in his anatomy. There are tooth-like things in the center of his pistil, and all the flowers around him occasionally shoot him a ghostly expression because of it. They didn't even bother to hide the look of their collective disgust for our plant boy. Then, out of nowhere, a massive mirror just spawned right in front of him. It was a scene right out of those novels and manhwas that he reads. What he saw in the reflection was quite odd and disheartening. This is how he looks now. He has become a blooming big-mouthed flower. For some reason, he remembered his previous life, when the only semblance of fun he could have had was the occasional playing of video games with friends. Still, back in those days, he was never good at games. He distinctly remembers dying to a Venus flytrap repeatedly. It seems like there are unfortunate things everywhere and anywhere. No wonder everyone was giving him weird looks in this isolated flower bed. Not only was he dreadfully short compared to everyone, but he also looked fundamentally different from the rest, too. He was so busy feeling insecure and odd about his current physical form that he only realized the weirder thing that had just happened. A mirror just appeared in front of him unprompted. That must mean something, right? He tried poking the thing with precaution. In response to his gentle poke, the mirror seemingly disintegrated away from reality in just a few moments. Next came a magical prompt indicating that the detected host had blossomed and entered the juvenile stage. The flower system had been activated automatically. Now this was the good news that he was desperately hoping and waiting for. This was the day that his system had finally arrived. To help ease and guide him through the process, the cursedly ugly system companion, Ru Hua, had been deployed to help the dear user. Our plant bro's name is Wu Sun, currently a juvenile stage-big mouth flower of 0, 3 meters in height and ranked as an ordinary plant. He has no special genes, no defensive skills, no special skills. and with a single attacking skill called swallowing. Reading all his listed out attributes gave him a big fright. Even the flavor text of being a flower planted in alpaca dung felt like an insult. Also, this Ruhua thing was just disturbing. Wusun felt like the system might have gotten it all wrong. He was supposed to dominate the world, right? While he was yapping and complaining about the unfairness of this newfound system, notifications about him as the host gaining 1 evolution points for 1 minute of sunbathing and 1 point for absorbing soil minerals continuously flooded down. Now these notifications he can definitely work with. The system might not be as bad as he initially thought. Continuously and passively gaining evolution points is a huge boon. There's only one line of thought regarding these points. They should be the currency used to upgrade and enhance himself, and they're adding up fast too. Wusun gloated and laughed as he had already gathered 100 evolution points without doing anything. The ultimate laid-back king with a built-in cheat system lifestyle might just be on the horizon. These other puny plants had better give up trying to compete with him for that delicious sunlight. As he was basking in the glow of imminent success, Ruhua appeared once again while picking her nose, calling Wusun master and asking him if he would like to enhance himself. He can choose to strengthen one of his 6 core parts: the flower, stem, leaves, roots, fruits, or seeds. It looks like his hypothesis was right. He can indeed level up and enhance his body. Without hesitation, he chose to upgrade the stem in hopes of growing taller to be able to sunbathe even more efficiently. Spending 100 evolution points to enhance the stem at once made him feel the growth happening in real time. It was like his body was being stretched out. The stem enhancement was a success. His height has increased by a whopping 0.003 meters. Yes, 0.003 paltry meters. All that gloating and taunting to the flowers all around him just netted him a growth that does not even equal the length of a tiny bug. That whole 100 points just gave him 3 millimeters of increase. It was barely noticeable by any stretch of the metric. He was now back on the opinion that he was given an extremely lousy system. Ruhua, still with her fingers picking her nose, assured him that this was just the first of many upgrades. Besides, 100 evolution points is too little for any significant upgrades. Even though he was given this system to make himself evolve, he might not even be able to surpass the surrounding tall flowers in the area at this rate. While he was yapping and yapping with endless complaints, a wasp was slowly making its way to the area of the flower bed. Downcast and disappointed with his current state, Wusun just unenthusiastically looked at the bug and meekly warned it not to sting him or anything. Wusun's disappointment regarding his situation quickly transformed from gloom to creeping anger. He poured all the frustrations he was feeling onto the nearby wasp. He does not even have any nectar, yet this guy was annoyingly buzzing all over the place and all around him. He was just not in the mood for any of this right now. Wusun kept on shouting angrily, and before he knew it, the bug had already accidentally entered his big mouth. Nothing can shut you up more effectively than accidentally putting a whole wasp inside your oral cavity. A mixture of fear and surprise painted Wusun's face. He was just slowly processing the fact that he accidentally swallowed a huge bug. He had been alive for a total of 17 years now, and he had never even eaten any raw food, let alone a giant hornet. Composing himself, he started reaching into his mouth and feeling all around to quickly spit the bug out to no avail. It looked like he had accidentally swallowed it whole. What's weirder was that it did not taste bad. Come to think of it, he kind of likes the taste of soil, too. Maybe plants just have a twisted sense of taste. Following his accidental ingestion, Ruhua appeared again to excitedly congratulate him for completing the so-called first devouring. He will be rewarded with a blind box treasure chest that will require 10 Darrower evolution points to open. It contains a random reward, ranging from evolution points to plant genes. It looks like he can get loot boxes just by devouring living creatures. This possibility could open some interesting developments. But the brutal caveat was he needed 10 Daorin evolution points to open the thing in the first place. This system of his is even more stingy than a goose. At this rate, the amount of 1 evolution point ticking every minute does not seem great at all. Still, Wusun had no other choice but to soldier it out for a whole 5 days. He has been working hard to sunbathe every day and absorbed all the water and nutrients he could take from the soil. He has finally accumulated exactly 10,000 evolution points today. All his fatigue vanished as he excitedly called on the system to open the damn chest. Ruhua jumped out to enthusiastically spend all the accumulated points to reveal the contents of the blind box. She congratulated Wusun for obtaining a B-rank vine gene. It can be used to fuse with his stem. The only thing it needed was his permission. With this vine gene fusing into his stem, this might just mean that he has the possibility of becoming one of those legendary tentacle monsters from some of those questionable videos. Also, B-rank does not sound bad for a starter plant gene at all. This possibility has also unlocked a new part of the system where all 6 of its core parts and corresponding abilities are displayed in a detailed manner. Wu Sun did not hesitate any longer. He screamed to start the fusion process at the top of his lungs. A green light full of vitality started emanating from the system and covering his entire body. It only took a few moments, and the prompt was already congratulating him for the successful fusion with the vine gene. The light of life has seemingly sparked inside Wu Sun. With this B-rank gene, his stem has gotten a whole lot stronger, sturdier, and more useful. With the vine gene, he can now transform his once short stem into thick vines. Wu Sun can use them to whip opponents or for binding play, whatever that means. From now on, Wu Sun wants to be called the Tentacle Monster. However, the reality was different. In reality, once Wu Sun accessed the vines, he couldn't get enough of them. He felt that they were very soft and flexible, as if he was manipulating his fingers in a human body. As a result, he found no better use for them than to bend them into figures in the air. However, that wasn't the most useful thing he could do with them. After reading the descriptions, he realized that in the future, he would also be able to unexpectedly attack the enemy from underground. The very next moment, he was already fantasizing about how he was massacring the wasps that might come next, and how he would capture their queen. But then his musings were interrupted by a buzzing sound from a wasp flying nearby. As if teasing, it flew in circles again, annoying the protagonist with its buzzing. Another appearance of a wasp made Wu Sun wonder if there was a wasp nest nearby. Deciding that this was the perfect opportunity for him to practice controlling his new vine, the protagonist launched it towards the wasp at breakneck speed. The vine was surrounded by green lightning bolts, causing Wu Sun to come up with the name Lightning Whip for this technique. Feeling danger approaching, the wasp turned around and saw the vine in front of him covered in a green glow, reaching out to grab it. And in the moment, it seemed like it was all over for the wasp. The distance that Wu Sun could extend his whips had reached its maximum, and as a result, no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to reach it. As he frustratedly lowered his whip, the protagonist tried to console himself and said to himself that he couldn't catch the big hornet so easily anyway, adding that the best solution would be to wait for it to come closer. Then he wondered if he could apply the enhancement he had seen before to the vines, perhaps making them thicker and longer. The wasp, meanwhile, hovered in the air and looked at Wu's Sun with a haughty smile, as if trying to say that he was a loser who was not capable of anything. This arrogant behavior hurt the protagonist, but he continued to endure and did not show any signs, because he knew that if he could endure it now, the wasp would definitely relax and come closer. And even then, he would be able to take full revenge for his humiliation. When the moment seemed to have arrived, and the wasp was close enough to be reached, Wusun shouted loudly that this time he wouldn't let it go. He released his vines at a great speed towards it, but to Wusun's surprise, his tentacle was not able to reach its target as it was intercepted by someone else a second before. This unexpected turn of events shocked not only the protagonist, but also the wasp itself, which did not understand what was happening. Woosun was furious and didn't even try to choose his words. All the curses he knew were used. The culprit was the yellow gecko, who was holding the wasp in his mouth and looking at the protagonist with a smile. Such insolence made Woosun furious, as he had no intention of sharing his food with anyone else at all. In the next moment, fire flared in his eyes, and he let out a fierce shout as he released his whips, covered in green lightning bolts, towards him, shouting that since he was taking away his food, he should be held responsible for it. Turning around, the gecko was confused to find that his tail was wrapped around some strange vine that held it tightly. Not wanting to be tied up, the gecko made an attempt to resist and try to escape, but unfortunately the vines held him very tightly, preventing him from doing so. Seeing that the lizard was resisting in a panic and trying to escape, Wu soon gripped its tail even tighter and said in an irritated voice that its attempts were futile, as he had no intention of letting it go so easily. However, in the next moment, something happened that the protagonist did not expect in any way. Part of the gecko's tail, which he was holding with his tentacles, suddenly separated from his body. And since the tension was quite strong, the whips, which flew backwards by inertia, hit him in the face with force. While the protagonist was recovering from the slap he had inflicted on himself, the gecko, not wanting to miss this chance, began to quickly get away from the dangerous plant, which was our protagonist. Woosun was both furious and confused as he realized that it was his fault for forgetting that lizards could throw back their tails. But he did manage to get something, and that was the tail, which remained in his tentacles. He decided it would be unwise to be upset about it, so he stuffed the rest of the tail into his mouth, adding that it was still better than nothing. After standing there gloomily for a while, waiting for the system's messages, and hoping that he would get the treasure chest again, he had not received a single message in the meantime. However, Wu soon realized that the only way to get the treasure chest reward was to eat an entire living creature. Scratching the back of his head, he complained in a somewhat dull voice that there were very few insects in the area. Even flies and ants, which are always plentiful everywhere, were nowhere to be found. A week later, an innocent beetle running by was grabbed by a green tentacle that suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and the next moment it went straight into the mouth of the protagonist, who opened it wide and ruthlessly ate the beetle, while the emotions of the flowers in the background changed from bewilderment to admiration. The next moment, a golden chest appeared in front of Woosun, accompanied by the voice of the system, which congratulated the protagonist for eating the dung beetle and obtaining the chest as a result, and informed him that 1,000 evolution points were required to open it. A note on the notification window that popped up also mentioned some rituals that could increase the chances of getting a good item. After reading this, the protagonist became furious, as there was no way he could perform them since he was just an ordinary flower, and he would not be able to take a bath, light incense, or change his clothes. In addition, the realization that he had just eaten a dung beetle added to his anger. He decided to ignore it, however, as he was now just a flower with a big mouth that had grown out of alpaca dung. After calming down a bit, he told the system to let her open the chest. After the chest opened, it shone with a bright golden light. The system spirit Ruhua appeared out of nowhere and told the protagonist that this time he was rewarded with 2,000 evolution points. The protagonist, still reeling from having eaten a dung beetle, asked the spirit in an irritated voice why he needed to evolve at all if he was already garbage. To which the spirit replied that it was a plant system in which the weirder the food he ate, the higher the chance that he would get a good item from the chest. After listening to Ruhua's words, Woosun couldn't find anything to reply, and he had no desire to argue with the system spirit right now. After a while, the grass that was growing near Woosun rustled, and the next moment, the culprit who broke the silence appeared. It was the same yellow gecko that we had seen before, but this time it looked very frightened and as if it was running away from someone. Not paying attention to the frightened look of the lizard, the protagonist, with his toothy smile on his face, asked him how he dared to come back here after taking away his prey. After which, with the words that the latter would pay for the wrongs he had done, Wu soon lunged towards the gecko with his tentacle, using his skill lightning strike. However, suddenly, something very similar to a tongue appeared behind the gecko, fleeing in panic, which was also approaching it at a tremendous speed. Despite being caught between two crossfires, both the protagonist's whip and the unknown creature that was supposed to be the tongue's owner, the gecko miraculously managed to dodge. However, the lizard was no longer important to Wusun, as he was now more concerned with the creature that the gecko was fleeing from in panic, and the one who was the owner of the tongue. With his eyes wide open, the protagonist watched as the creature retracted its long tongue back. After that, a head covered in spikes appeared. As it turned out, in front of him was a huge frog whose skin was covered with spikes, while its eyes glowed threateningly with a red light. The frog pushed off the ground and jumped into the air, heading straight for our protagonist, who was frozen in place, unable to move. Having recovered from the shock, he desperately wondered why he was attacked by such a big frog. He had no time to despair, however, as his life hung in the balance. In addition, he was also caught up in the fact that the frog had abandoned its pursuit of the gecko and turned its attention to him, thinking that he was easy prey. The next moment, he was out of his daze, and he swung his tentacle with all his might at the huge frog, shouting furiously for it to get out of here. It flipped in the air and fell to the ground with a thud. But the next moment, it was standing on the ground. But in the next moment, it was already standing on its feet, staring at Wusun angrily with its red eyes that clearly showed its rage. Deciding not to wait for the frog to fully recover and attack him, the protagonist decided to attack first, swinging at it with his tentacle, which would act as a whip in this attack. As planned, the whip attack hit the target. However, it did not do the expected damage. After receiving the blow, the frog only squinted its eyes. In the next moment, the toad fiercely grabbed the tentacle of Wusun, who did not anticipate this outcome and did not have time to return it to him. The protagonist, meanwhile, was trying with all his might not to be dragged away by the frog, which had already begun to forcefully pull on his tentacle, and was pondering how the frog was able to repel his attack so easily. To his senses, it felt like he had hit a rock, but he had no more time to ponder as the next moment the frog stuck out its huge tongue and wrapped it around his stem. This action from the frog left Wusun confused as he didn't quite understand what it was going to do now. But in the next moment, everything became very clear. After all, the frog grabbed the stem of the main character and began to tear it out of the ground along with the roots. Realizing that now his beautiful new life could end, Wusun panicked and started to scream loudly and tried to resist. After the frog had firmly grasped his stem with his tongue, he began to pull with force, and our flower began to slowly separate from the ground. And when his stubs began to break off, he cried out, "It hurts." It hurt so much that he felt like his body was about to be torn apart. He now had a pressing question. Do plants feel pain like animals? He continued to cling to the ground with his roots with tears in his eyes. Now he understood how all those poor plants, flowers, and grass felt, on which he had taken out all his anger in his past life. Now, it seemed to him that the pain he was feeling was God's punishment for the pain he had once inflicted on the plants. The frog was inexorably pulling him harder and harder, ripping him out along with a piece of earth. Wu soon realized that it seemed like it was all over for him now, as he would most likely die if he was uprooted from the ground. He could already see the cold breath of death at the back of his head. He didn't think he would feel it again so soon. But when there was no more hope, he noticed something, or rather someone, and he was surprised and frightened. A yellow gecko, already familiar to us, appeared on the branch above the frog. He did not understand what the little lizard was going to do, whether he wanted to avenge his lost tail or to help him with the frog. The gecko, in order not to lose his advantage of surprise and not to alert the frog with his finger, showed our flower to be silent and not to draw attention to him. Wu Sun was very surprised at this turn of events. How did the gecko know such gestures? And why did he look so smart? What kind of world had he gotten into that all the beasts here were so smart and cunning? This could be a problem for him in the future if he lived to see it. The gecko didn't wait long and jumped at the frog from the branch. He landed right on its head between its ugly yellow eyes. And before the frog woke up from the surprise and had time to throw him off, he aimed his toothy mouth right at its eye. After his bite, dark blood gushed from the frog's eye. The frog would have howled from the pain if it could, but as it only made an incomprehensible sound and jumped up on the spot, it was forced to retract its tongue back, letting go of our toothy flower. The frog fell on its back, going to crush the pesky gecko, but it failed as it jumped off in time. But as long as the frog left the flower alone, this was his chance. Wusun sighed from fatigue in realizing how close he was to death, but he didn't have much time. Therefore, he immediately began to prepare for the attack and raised his battle whip. He wrapped it around the wounded frog and bound it tightly before it could even quack. Then he was going to throw it away with force and plow the ground in the clearing with it, which he eventually did. After that, he began to spin the frog, throwing it against the ground and then spinning it again. This made it dizzy, and its tongue fell out. But the frog had another trick up her sleeve that she was saving especially for situations like this. She let some slippery and smelly liquid out of her skin, and when it hit the whip, the frog just slipped off it and flopped to the ground. Our flower did not have time to react in time from such a surprise and was a little confused. He thought that the frog is already in his hands, and it cannot escape. However, thanks to its trick, it has already successfully jumped away from this unfortunate flower, which brought it so much pain and trouble, instead of a light snack. Our flower still tried to reach her with his whip, but it was already too late, and the frog was running away from him in the distance. This situation made him very angry with our toothy flower, who was very close to dealing with the frog once and for all. But her tricks and ability to run fast saved her pimply skin. But nothing. Now at least she wouldn't dare to come near him next time,